it's time again for another episode of Jason's Game Room, the only podcast on YouTube that talks about everything gaming, from board games to video games to card games to dice games. Hell, if Pog is your jam, we'll talk about Pogs, just let me know. If it's gaming, it's on this show. Now, on our last episode, I talked about the various expansions from Magic the Gathering and the issues therein. This time around, I want to talk about the various sets and expansions of the Star Trek customizable card game and some of the issues and problems created by them. For any of you that have not paid attention to some of my previous shows, I've been playing the Star Trek customizable card game since 1994 when it came out. It was my go-to card game. I actually got into Magic a year later, but as it stands, Star Trek customizable card game was a way of life for me. And I want to get into the expansions that came out over the years and pros and cons, I guess, things I thought of them, and even some unnecessary bits concerning the expansions. Now, if you're familiar with the Star Trek card game, you know that when it came out in 1994, there were two premier sets. There was the black border and the white border. Now, I never got right in at the very first day because with the black border and the metal tin that came out that had the initial set, I got in on the white border. I believe it was a month after it came out. White border 60 card starter decks were what the gaming stores had at the time, as well as the expansions pack. So that was my first foray, and they weren't cheap at the time. It cost $9 for a starter box of Star Trek customizable card game, and for me that was a lot of money. That being said, about a year later, so this is after I'd already bought several starter boxes and many expansion packs to get going. In 1995, the Alternate Universe expansion came out, and that was an interesting expansion because you had cards with the little Alternate Universe icon and a new type of card, a doorway card, which had the alternate universe door. You could bring these cards into play during the game, and they would enhance your deck greatly. Cards from equipment, awesome personnel, new ships, things like that, that would change the mechanics of the game while you were playing. Obviously, there were ways to get rid of some of these cards quickly if you were an opponent facing them, but they made the game a lot more fun and hurry. And at the time, we thought that was the best thing since sliced bread. Then, almost a year later, the Q Continuum came out, and that introduced not only some new playable cards, but also Q dilemmas, Q events, Q interrupts. Obviously, it focused on Q, and cards such as Gift of the Tormentor, which under certain conditions would give your opponent 100 easy points, but it honestly wasn't that easy. That also changed the dynamics of the game, and it also changed the way you would build your decks because a lot of people were using now the new doorway cards, the Q's Tent and the Q Flash, to initiate a side deck to bring out cards, power cards that you'd keep in there. So by introducing the Q themed cards and the side deck, that also changed the game, I would say forever. Even though I knew players that would use a side deck in every deck, and there were players like me that would only use it in certain decks because it didn't always make sense. As the game progressed, in 1997 we had the first Anthology come out, which was that sealed long box. And it had 6 premium cards. You had, I think you had 2 or 3 60-card starter decks, and you had a couple expansion packs, and the Warp Pack. And I never actually had the first Anthology because it cost a lot of money at the time, and without going into my history, it was hard for me to put $30 or $40 together for that. But I managed to get the Warp Pack and a few cards from that Anthology by trading, and it was an interesting concept to have that Anthology because you could actually take that Anthology, you could make a decent deck from everything in that box and still have good cards left over. And I think that was the idea behind it, even though it was horribly overpriced. I don't want to talk about the Faggio collection because it was only an 18 card collection. Yes, it was super rare, and yes, I pretty much have most of them, and I've put a couple of them in decks, but it was more of a collector's thing than a playable thing. I know people that bought the Faggio collection right away. I didn't, I waited. And most of the people that bought that collection did not put the cards into their decks. They were happy to keep it as a side collection because of the rarity of the cards. Whereas I've put most of them in decks, but I only have a couple copies at most of each because of the rarity. It was an interesting idea. I did like it. It's just overhyped. In 1997, my favorite expansion for the Star Trek card game came out, and that was, of course, First Contact. And this came out a while after the movie, Star Trek First Contact, and it introduced the Borg as a playable affiliation in the game. And in my humble opinion, First Contact was the expansion that changed the game the most. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, well, Blaze of Glory changed it because of the battle mechanics and the new tactic cards, and it changed the face of combat in the game. Yeah, that's nice, but by adding the Borg as a playable affiliation, the dynamics of the game were not only changed, they were flipped and thrown out the window. Because now you had this ultra-powerful affiliation with badass ships, personnel, Borg drones that can enhance these ships well past what they were designed for. And you had an unstoppable force. And as I've mentioned before on this show, I have a Borg deck. I've had a Borg deck put together for a long time, and it's never been defeated. That's how good the Borg is in this game. I think it was an awesome idea to create the Borg as an affiliation. It was a great idea. Now, there's a lot of people that got butthurt over the years playing the Star Trek card game up until this point, so the purpose of them making a Borg deck was to get revenge. On the other hand, I preferred using a Federation deck, but putting together a Borg deck gave me a dynamic on the space line if I was playing against somebody I knew had power decks put together, because I could wipe them out, not so much for revenge, but I was playing to stalemate and still able to score points at the same time. The next big thing was the official tournament sealed deck. I remember buying 2 or 3 of these. I think I actually traded for the third one, because they were quite pricey at the time as well, and I did buy 1 or 2, and I traded for a third one. The sealed deck was interesting because it had 20 new cards, 4 packages of the Premier Expansion and 1 alternate universe, and the collectible box designs were cool because you had Bajoran, Borg, Cardassian, Federation, Klingon, and Romulan as the collectible boxes. I never got the Borg box. That was the one I wanted the most. As it stands over the years, I have the Federation box, I have the Cardassian box, and I have the Bajoran box. I think the Bajoran was the first one I got, which was disappointing because who the hell wants a Bajoran box? And I believe I traded my Klingon box for the Cardassian box because the Cardassian logo is pretty damn cool. But that was an interesting step for the game, was the sealed deck, because you could make a minor deck out of that, but they were a great supplement if you needed to add it to a deck you were already constructing. And plus you had a handy little box to carry 1 or 2 decks into tournaments. So it added a fun dynamic to the game. And I think it was an overall good idea. And I believe Decipher did this with the Star Wars game as well, but I'm not talking about that game today. Moving along, we got into the Deep Space Nine themed cards. So once Decipher managed to get the licenses for Deep Space Nine, they came out with the Deep Space Nine expansion, which was put out as a standalone. You could buy it as starter decks and expansions. You can play it from there on in, or you can combine the older expansions at that point with the game. The Dominion came out, and also Blaze of Glory, which added a new dynamic to battling. Personally, as much of a pain in the ass as the old dynamic for battling was, the tactic cards that came out in Blaze of Glory, they extended the time of the game. So they it was fun trying to come up with tactic cards and enhance the battle, but it also prolonged the battle sequences and the turns. And when you have a certain objective in mind with your deck, and you're getting bogged down by endless battles, it's a pain in the ass. So there's pros and cons for that. Some people love the battle mechanics of Blaze of Glory. I'm impartial. I'm in the middle of that. I don't like them and I don't dislike them. I just think it took more time than necessary. Rules of Acquisition came out, and it gave us the Ferengi as an affiliation, and a lot of people laugh at the Ferengi, but if you go over the Ferengi personnel cards and their ships, they have some awesome attributes, and I'm beginning to build a Ferengi deck again because I've gone over some of the Ferengi cards I have, and you can actually put together a decent deck with those guys. So it's nothing to be laughed at. Once we started getting past those expansions, so the second Anthology came out as another one of those sealed long boxes with all the starter decks and expansion packs and things like that. The Trouble with Tribbles came out, introducing yet another side deck, and also the Tribbles CCG, which was horribly pointless. I do have some, I never played it. We started getting into the expansions that didn't matter as much. So you had Mirror Mirror, which was okay. It introduced the Mirror Universe, but the Mirror Universe, in my opinion, really bogged down the game. I never really got into that expansion. There were a few good cards in that set, but I didn't like it as a whole. The last really good expansion that came out was Voyager in 2001. So this again was a standalone type expansion. It had starter decks of 60 cards, expansion packs. I really enjoyed the Voyager expansion, mainly due to the fact that it introduced the Delta Quadrant and the races therein. So as the expansions came out for that afterwards, you had Kazon, Vidians. The Vidians were quite useless in my opinion, and then the Hirogen, and you had more Borg, which was awesome because now you could create a Delta Quadrant Borg deck. Once we got past that, you got into the motion pictures expansion, which was blah. It was okay. You had the original crew from the original series and the motion pictures. All good things was fixing the broken links in the series up to that point of the Star Trek card game, but it was too little too late. And Star Trek Enterprise coming in as the Enterprise Collection, because at this point we already had for 2 years the 2E, which was the second edition, which I've told you before was crap and contributed to the death of the Star Trek customizable card game. So it's easy to say that the game was good throughout its run, but once we got to the Voyager expansion, you can tell the game was on a downturn from there, and you had a lot of people just sticking with their core sets from the first bunch of expansions up to DS9. You didn't see a lot of people buying Voyager and or playing with it or creating Delta Quadrant decks. I think that's unfortunate because there are people like me that have put together a Delta Quadrant deck from time to time, and it's actually fun to play with. But I digress. A lot of those late expansions were not for everybody, and as I said, second edition came out and pretty much killed off the game because it was shit, plain and simple. I honestly don't know anyone who's played the Star Trek card game for any length of time that actually loves or likes or tolerates the second edition. It is what ruined everything. So there you have it. That's my take on the expansions for the Star Trek customizable card game. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, tell all your friends, and I'll have more gaming on the next episode. Have a great day, everybody. Game on!